I recently watched a movie called Eugene Onegin. It's based on, as many of you probably know, Alexander Pushkin, the Russian poet's very epic, long poem called Eugene Onegin. There's also an opera version as well, but this movie version has Ralph Fiennes playing Eugene Onegin, and he's, of course, really, really brilliant at playing this character. Um, and basically, it's Eugene Onegin, the central character, is a cynical, arrogant nobleman who is bored with his life, bored with, I guess, particularly with everybody. It seems like particularly with people in his own class, and he doesn't like the bucolic life either, the country life. He's constantly making fun of his fellow aristocrats when he goes to visit people in the country. And but that is also where this woman named Tatiana falls in love with him, but he does not return her love. And there's even a very famous scene in it where she basically wants to marry him. She confesses her love to him, and he rejects her love by talking about all of the boredom, the adultery, the sense of monotony, the ultimately really destructive nature of marriage. And it's this beautiful monologue that he delivers, and it shows you another side of him, that he's not just misanthropic. There's a side of him that is also more elegant, more perceptive. There's a side of him that seems redeeming, and you can't help but like the character, even though he can be kind of a jerk. But then it starts to go downhill. So that story kind of takes a darker turn afterwards when he has an affair with a woman that his very idealistic friend, who's nothing like him, is already in love with. And his friend challenges him to a duel, and Eugene Onegin ends up killing his friend. And the story completely just devolves from there. But I think some of the really important things about this story is, I think, and particularly about Eugene Onegin's psychology of being like the sort of the cynical, arrogant person in a class of people that is in a higher position of power. I think reflects many of the things that I've been discussing before, and in particular, it portrays something that I remember a while back I was reading about it, talking about the Venetian bankers, right? The very powerful figures that had this sort of cynicism and maybe even a mistrust of human nature, of humanity, right? And that sort of, I imagine, would run rampant into cross-culturally throughout Europe, I would imagine, and perhaps, I'm speculating, infect the minds of even people within Russian culture as well. I mean, I'm just sort of on the tip of the iceberg right now. I'm just starting to look into it more, but I imagine that would be the case. And but it's also I think that the portrayal of this type of psychology also has many cultural differences, like distinctions from the way that it is portrayed in American culture. Right, and just as an example, there's a book by Bret Easton Ellis. It's called American Psycho, and it's about this hotshot rich banker named Patrick Bateman, who he's much more brutal, much worse. There's almost no comparison between him and Eugene Onegin. However, he does perhaps, I think, have that similar psychology of people who are from a wealthier class, but there's something grows dead and hollow inside of them, and but they're constantly trying to appear human. They're trying to sort of preserve their own humanity, and so this ties into that sort of mentality of the Venetian bankers, of that sort of infectious or contagious, I should say, quality that we see in surprisingly, like, the banking industry, but also in the class of people that Patrick Bateman belongs to. What Bret Easton Ellis was actually satirizing was how much power and how much mania really existed there. That we often will put a lot of stock in politicians and the kind of weight that they have in society, but there's a lot of sort of underworld kind of criminal stuff that is actually sometimes way more scarier within that kind of echelon of people. And I think that sort of mania, though, is made a lot more obvious, though, in Patrick Bateman than the sort of elegance and refinement that you see in the other story of Onegin, right? That I think the most brilliant part is at the end of American Psycho, when it starts to dawn on him that all of these violent crimes, supposedly, that he's committed, perhaps he didn't really commit. That they're all just in his imagination. That the crimes against these rivals that were, supposedly killing these rivals he had at work for financial gain, killing these women for sexual pleasure, just crazy stuff. But apparently at the end, he started to get clues that it was all in his head. And I think this is an interesting turning point to me, because it's much more interesting than I think what most authors would have done. Like, if it were Stephen King or some average kind of thriller writer, it would be the other way around, right? The narrator would be deluded or plagued with some kind of positive delusion, because they can't cope with reality, and then the dark truth would dawn on them at the end. And then they have to come to terms with it, and then they slip back into the positive one again because they can't deal with it. Like, that would be a pretty standard one, but I think what's interesting about this one is that when the mania disappears and all is well, there's no danger, nothing is actually wrong. It's there's something about that is so much more powerful. I can't even explain exactly what it is. I guess what it is that it's like that scene in Alice in Wonderland where she's grabbing the Queen of Hearts and shaking her and is trying to, it's going to kill her, and then as she wakes up, she realizes it's just a kitten in her hands, right? It's like Patrick Bateman goes from this kind of heartless, wealthy, conniving, menacing figure to suddenly he's like this babbling maniac, this idiot, sweating, showing up, acting all weird when he sees his friends, and not knowing he can't think straight, giggling, laughing, saying funny things, and then at the very end, a very famous line is that even after he's confessed all of his darkest secrets, that his confession has meant nothing. That his pain is sharp and constant; it's never going to stop. And that's of course, I think, where another thing about the aspect of American culture that kind of more, I guess, I don't know how to describe it, that emotionally unstable quality, even I would say lacking in that sense of authority that you would see in the aristocracy, right? You could clearly tell that he would not be one of Onegin's people, right? But it's interesting to watch. I've even watched like real aristocrats footage of them, the way that they actually behave, even if they committed these atrocities, right? That there's that sense of poise that they have, and I think Ralph Fiennes really depicts that the best.